Ready to sleep? Perfect. Turn off the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to be thankful you weren't born in the Middle Ages. Because if you'd opened your eyes in the year 1325, the first thing you'd feel wouldn't be peace. It would be the stench, literally the smell, a mix of damp wood, unwashed humanity, and, well, something you'd rather not identify. That smell screams you're alive, but in a threatening tone. Your bed, if we can call it that, is a wooden board with a straw mattress. Straw that has been inhabited, infiltrated and conquered by an entire civilization of fleas. You itch all over, but you don't scratch, because if you scratch, you'll wake the rat sleeping in the corner. Your body is stiff because you're 22 years old, which in medieval terms means you're basically at the final stage of your useful life. In those days, reaching 40 was like unlocking a legendary achievement. Your house is a single room, no glass windows, no privacy, and hopefully no dead animals in the ceiling. You live with your family, mum, dad, 5 siblings, a goat, a pig, and a very punctual rooster that has just screamed in your face, all in the same space. Everything. Every breath comes with a dose of someone else's sweat. Furniture is optional, the floor is dirt, the fleas come free. Now let's be positive, you're alive. The bad news? You're alive here. Welcome to the Middle Ages where hygiene is optional and disease is guaranteed. Your day begins with an ancient ritual, trying to get up without stepping on something alive, a cockroach, your cousin's foot, or a mix of both. The air is humid, and not from the rain, but from the breath of 6 people who've been sharing the same atmosphere all night. And since we're in this walled nightmare, it's time to start the day. First, go to the bathroom. Where is it? Great question. There isn't one. If you're lucky, there's a latrine outside. If not, a hole. Literally a hole. Sometimes shared by several houses, always full and always traumatic. If it rains, doesn't matter. You go anyway. If it's windy, worse. The memories come back. Toilet paper? Sure. It's called whatever you find. Leaves, old rags, dry grass, or nothing. Sometimes it's just nothing. And when you're done, you must announce it. Yes, Gardello, you shout while throwing your chamber pot out the window. Translation? Watch out for the water, a poetic way of saying brace yourself, someone's about to get peed on. If you're downstairs, may God bless you. Back inside, time for breakfast. Thinking toast with avocado, hot coffee, fresh bread? How cute. Your breakfast is a grey mush made from whatever was left in the communal pot. A mixture that's been reheated so many times it now has political opinions. They say it's nutritious, but never specify for whom. If you're lucky, there's a piece of stale bread, so hard you could use it as a weapon in case of a Viking invasion. Drink? Beer? Yes, even for kids, because water is suspicious. Very suspicious. Without a filtration system, fermenting everything seems smarter than drinking it straight. And the taste? Well, depends on whether you found dead rats in the barley, but don't worry, fermentation kills doubt, or so they say. And since there's no refrigeration, it's always warm. Perfect for breakfast. Your stomach is unhappy, but it doesn't get a vote, so the day begins. Got energy? Doesn't matter. You're going to work anyway, because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, you'll probably die of dysentery anyway. Before you leave, you get dressed. With what? Your clothes are made of wool, always, in summer, winter, for sleep, or digging ditches. And no, it's not soft wool. It's like rubbing yourself with an emotional wire sponge. You've worn the same tunic for months. It gets washed when it rains. Maybe, if you're not inside watching your home flood. Your shoes, if you have any, are made of untreated leather, held together with laces made by someone crying. And if you don't have shoes, you get used to mud, rocks, and animal poop. Your feet no longer feel anything, and they shouldn't. That's their defense mechanism. Now take a deep breath. It smells like manure, smoke, and human bodies, and out you go. The sun hasn't fully risen, but you're already up. Because when the rooster crows, the body gets up. There is no more aggressive alarm clock than hunger. And all of this, dear viewer, was just the morning. You woke up, had a breakfast made of despair, and now the real fun begins. The moment you realize your body, your brave little body, is losing the war against the Middle Ages. And no, this isn't a metaphor. You're quite literally a battlefield. The enemies? Not invisible germs. They crawl, they jump, they bite, and they live on you with more rights than you have. First, lice. Everyone has them. Nobles, peasants, monks, children. It's not shameful. It's part of the scenery, like mud or hunger. You get rid of them with a wooden spoon or your fingers. Sometimes couples compete to see who can kill more lice. That's called medieval romance. Then come fleas, and they never come alone. They travel in squadrons like they're heading to a convention. They bite everywhere. No body part is sacred. And at night, if you're lucky, you'll only wake up with a welt. If not, with the plague. Your only tunic is coarse, itchy, and feels like stiff cured leather. It doesn't get washed. It gets aired out if it rains. And when it gets wet, it clings to you like a broken promise. When you peel it off, you lose a layer of skin with it. Let's not even talk about shoes. If you have them, they're so thin you feel every rock, twig, and emotional wound through your soles. If you don't, your feet gave up months ago. Blisters, calluses, cuts, infections. Your spa routine involves mud, manure, and the occasional splash of street urine. Your skin is no longer yours. It belongs to the fleas, the lice, the fungi. Everyone scratches. No one apologizes. If you're chatting with the local priest while digging into your armpit with a wooden fork, totally normal. That's just life. No creams, no aloe, no shame. Got a rash? Probably mange. Got sores? Welcome to the club. Does it burn? Of course. But the burning reminds you you're still alive, though not for long if it gets infected. Now let's talk about teeth, or rather, the archaeological remains of what used to be teeth. Toothbrush? Doesn't exist. No floss, no toothpaste, no mouthwash. Sometimes people chew on a stick to clean them. Spoiler, it doesn't work. Your mouth is an ecosystem. Cavities, swollen gums, breath that could be classified as a chemical weapon. It doesn't matter what class you belong to. Your molars have sworn an oath of self-destruction. If you still have teeth by your 25th birthday, throw a party. You've beaten the odds. Every bite is a gamble. Every chew could be your last. Toothache? Normal? Treatment? The barber yanks it out with pliers, no anesthesia. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair. 2 for 1, convenient and traumatic. Got a fever from a dental infection? Congrats. Welcome to the sepsis challenge. Survive, and you earn another week in the Middle Ages. Don't, and well, may Holy Poland receive you. Now imagine kissing someone, not out of love, out of desperation. Both of you reeking of fermented barley with teeth like a medieval minefield. Romance is alive and well, just not for the faint of heart. And when you speak, no one notices your breath, because everyone smells the same. It's a collective agreement of odour. And still, somehow, people find love, or at least something like it, amid the filth. But back to your body, because beyond the itching, the burning, the hunger, and the dehydration, you're always tired. Your back aches. Your hands are cracked. You're 22, and already you look like someone standing at the exit gate of a life. By age 22, your back feels like you're 80, because you've been bending your spine since you were 5. Literally. And if you're a woman, the game comes in hard mode. Not only do you work the fields, you also raise children, cook, make clothes, care for animals, and survive a medieval patriarchal system that treats you as a walking uterus with no rights. Got your period? Good luck. No pads, no tampons, just rags. And if anyone notices, you might be accused of witchcraft, because of course blood equals demons. And kids, they don't play, they work. From age 4 or 5, they're already carrying water, scaring away crows or planting seeds. Their favourite game? Don't die before winter. That's it. All of this while your clothes scratch like sandpaper, the heat suffocates, the cold numbs, and flies follow you like obsessive fans. You're in a constant war with your surroundings, and the worst part, you don't even know life could be better. You have no point of comparison. There's no Wi-Fi to complain on Twitter. Your body is a battleground, but there are no victories here, only survival. You've already had your breakfast of despair, put on your sandpaper tunic and stepped outside. Now it's time to work, not out of passion, not for purpose. You work or you die. And sometimes, even if you work, you die anyway. Your job depends entirely on genetic and geographic lottery. If you were born a peasant, sorry, there are no promotions. You work the land of a feudal lord who doesn't know your name and doesn't care. He just wants you to plant, water, harvest, and not die. At least not before you finish your quota. You start at sunrise and stop at sunset. No office hours, no coffee breaks, just dirt, sweat, and prayers that it doesn't rain right after you plant. Your tools? A shovel, a wooden rake, and your blistered hands. No gloves, no boots. Every grain you plant is a gamble against weather, pests, and poverty. And if you're not a farmer, congratulations. You might be a blacksmith, tanner, or weaver. But your life's not much better. You work in cramped, smoky, toxic spaces, often filled with animal guts or chemical fumes. Your payment? Food, if you're lucky, or sometimes just more debt. Your workshop is small, dark, with zero ventilation. Workplace safety means try not to die before the month ends. If you're a blacksmith, you handle fire and molten metal with bare hands. If you're a tanner, you work with urine, yes, actual human pee, because that's what softens leather. So you spend your days surrounded by vats of piss, wondering what you did in a past life to deserve this one. You're stomping hides with your bare feet in vats of fetid liquid surrounded by stench. Protection? That's your hope and your prayers. Break an arm? Tough luck. There's no medical leave, no hospital. They tie it with a rag, hand you some warm beer, and tell you to keep going. Because if you don't work, someone else will. And just like that, you become replaceable. Women? They work all day, non-stop. Caring for children, cooking, cleaning, spinning wool, gathering firewood, milking animals, and of course, they work the fields too. Their day starts before the men's and ends after, and if they're pregnant, doesn't matter. They give birth, rest for an hour, and then go back to the fields, because wheat doesn't care about postpartum recovery. Children? No break for them either. By age 5, they're helping carry water, scare birds off the crops, or collect animal dung for fertilizer. School? A myth, reserved for the rich and the monks. Toys? If you find a smooth stone and have a bit of imagination, congratulations, you have entertainment. And now, let's talk about the weather, because in the Middle Ages, weather isn't small talk, it's a threat. Too much sun, the crops burn. Too much rain, the crops rot. Too much cold, everything dies, including you. In winter, you literally freeze. There's no insulation, no heating, just layers of damp clothing and a small fire that's always running low on wood. And going outside to work like that? Mandatory. In summer, you roast like medieval chicken. The sun is unforgiving. Your clothes trap the heat, your skin boils, your feet burn, and you keep going because stopping is not an option. And in the middle of all this, disease, no vaccines, no real doctors, just prayers, superstition, and brews that smell worse than the illness. They bleed you, purge you, make you sniff herbs, and if that doesn't work, God's will. And if none of that kills you, there's always the feudal lord, the guy who collects taxes even when your harvest fails, who can decide that today he owns your donkey, your land, or your daughter. Why? Because he can. And if you complain, he'll imprison you, or worse. There's no justice, just power. And after all that, when you no longer feel your back, your legs, or your soul, you return home. But don't expect a hot dinner waiting, just another pot of watery barley mush. If it's a lucky day, maybe there's a roasted rat in it. You sit, you breathe, and you realize tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that too. There are no vacations, no retirement, just work until you die or can't move anymore. And yet, someone in the future will say, people had it better back then. Sure, you've survived half a day. You're covered in sweat, dirt, and maybe whatever you stepped on behind the barn. So you try to refresh yourself, drink some water, maybe wash your face. Spoiler, bad idea. Because in the Middle Ages, water is basically a hidden weapon. It looks safe, but innocent, clear, bright, fresh. But it's a trap. Because that sparkling stream bubbling along the path, it probably contains more bacteria than a modern toilet. See how clean it looks? That's because the filth has sunk to the bottom. What you don't see are the parasites, the human waste, the slugs, the animal carcasses, and the entire contents of chamber pots from half the village, dumped upstream by someone who was just cleaning out. So yes, drinking water is a game of Russian roulette, and that's why everyone drinks beer, including children. Not for fun, not for taste. But because beer is boiled during the brewing process, and boiling kills whatever nightmare the water was carrying, Is it low in alcohol? Yes. Does it taste bad? Also, yes. But would you rather die from explosive diarrhea? Didn't think so. And what if you decide to bathe? Maybe you think a nice bath will bring some relief? Wrong. In the Middle Ages, washing your body was considered dangerous. Yes, dangerous. People believed that water opened the pores of your skin, and by opening your pores, you let diseases enter your body. So the dirtier you were, the more protected you supposedly were. Medieval logic. If you smell like a barn, you're invincible. Were there public bathhouses? Sure, a few. But they were rare and quickly gained a bad reputation, turning into hotspots for gossip, prostitution, and, according to the church, sin. So one by one, they were shut down. Staying dirty wasn't just accepted, it was encouraged. And if you still wanted to bathe at home, get ready. First, you have to carry buckets of water from the well. Then you have to boil it over a fire. After that, you pour it into a wooden tub, one that leaks from every corner. And finally, you pray no one uses it before or after you, because sharing bathwater wasn't optional, it was the norm. And that rainwater you collected so hopefully, it's now filled with insects, mold, and generous gifts from birds. No thanks. Now imagine you get sick. Your stomach hurts, you feel dizzy, you have a fever, and you need help. So you look for a doctor, and that's when the real suffering begins. Medieval doctors are nothing like what you're imagining. No white coats, no stethoscopes, just dark robes, amulets, and dusty old books written in Latin, packed with more superstition than science. They believe your health depends on the balance of the four humours: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. And if one of them is out of balance, you're doomed. Got a fever? They'll bleed you. Have a cough? They'll purge you with laxatives made of herbs, manure, and pure hope. Got a headache? They'll put leeches on your face. Literally. Toothache? They'll yank the tooth out with a rusty tool, no anaesthesia, just a prayer mumbled mid-yank. And if the doctor isn't available? No problem, the barber does surgeries too. He'll give you a haircut, a shave, and open your body with the same knife. All in the same sitting. The barber might also cut open a vein, because nothing says professional care like a Swiss Army knife. Midwives do what they can during childbirth, but if complications arise, it's considered God's will. There are no antibiotics. If you get a deep wound, you have two options: gangrene or divine luck. Hospitals aren't places to heal. They're charitable houses where you're left to die with a bit more dignity. One shared bed, a thin blanket, and a priest telling you everything happens for a reason. Meanwhile, the patient next to you is coughing up blood. If the plague reaches the village, that's it. Game over. The Black Death doesn't care about your age, class, or faith. It covers you with buboes, fever, and kills you within 48 hours. You're isolated, buried quickly, and if you're lucky, only after you're truly dead. Superstitions rule the day. They hang amulets around your neck, make you swallow stones, rub onions on your wounds. If you scream, it means the demon is leaving. If you die, it means you didn't pray enough. So health in the Middle Ages wasn't a state of being. It was a hope, a wish, a myth. If at any point in the day something hurts, the best thing to do is stay silent, sit down, stare at the horizon and say, well, at least they didn't bleed me today. By now you understand the Middle Ages were a hostile place for humans. What you might not have realised yet is that you weren't alone. No, never alone. You were surrounded by living creatures, small, sticky, biting, and sometimes worse than your neighbours. Let's start with your closest companions, the domestic animals, not those cute Instagram puppies. We're talking about pigs inside the house, chickens sleeping in the bed, goats chewing on your hanging underwear, because stables were often the same room as your bedroom. No privacy, no peace either. Always shared infections. Dogs weren't pets, they were tools. They hunted, barked, bit. If they got sick, well, if they survived, fine. If not, they became food. Cats were a dilemma. Good for catching rats, but suspected of being agents of the devil. So sometimes they were fed, sometimes burned, depending on the religious rumour of the week. And the mice? There was no medieval kitchen without mice. They weren't fought. They were tolerated as part of the furniture, until the rats arrived, bringing fleas, bacteria, and the plague. That's when things got apocalyptic. Fleas were the true queens of the Middle Ages. No one controlled them. They lived in your beds, clothes, and hair, biting all day long, and bringing the bubonic plague as a gift. Yes, that plague that killed half of Europe. And it wasn't because someone sneezed, it was a flea on a rat, on a ship, in a market, and boom, millions dead. But fleas were just the beginning. You had bedbugs, lice, ticks the size of your patients, and they all lived happily with you. Did you scratch? Of course. It was the medieval equivalent of scrolling TikTok. Everyone did it. In church, at the table, during sex. One hand scratching, the other holding back the disgust. If you complained, they told you it was normal, even a blessing. If the insects don't bite you, you're dead. Thanks, medieval auntie. Bigger plagues? Of course. Locusts. Not the sea kind, but the ones that came from the sky as biblical punishment. They ate the crops, the leaves, the flowers, your will to live. And when they left hunger, plague, and despair. Now let's step outside the village a bit. You go to the forest to gather wood, to hunt, or to die. Because the forests were the backyard of terror. Wolves, many wolves, and not the cute kind. Documentaries. Hungry wolves unafraid of humans hunting in packs. And if you went alone without weapons, with some luck, they'd only eat one leg. Large, grumpy bears. In winter, they came down from the mountains looking for food. Sometimes the food was you, and even if you survived a swipe, you could still die from bleeding 2 days later. Snakes. Not many, but enough. And since antidotes didn't exist, a bite was a poisoned lottery. Yes, there were superstitions. They hung garlic on doors, placed dried toads under pillows, drew symbols to protect themselves from animal spirits. None of it worked, but it distracted people. And in the Middle Ages, distraction was therapy. If a real plague hit you, a true infestation, a cloud of flies, a tide of worms, there was only one option: pray. Pray while the larvae danced on your breakfast bread. So yes, surviving the climate, hunger, disease, and the feudal lord was just part of the game. You also had to survive the free, cageless zoo that was the Middle Ages. If you thought working, scratching lice, and drinking lukewarm beer were the worst parts of the Middle Ages, wait until you meet the national entertainment: war. And we're not talking about modern wars with missiles, GPS, or even waterproof boots. No, this was sword against bone, spear against mud up to your knees, all for reasons as confusing as the honour of a distant cousin of the king, or because God said to conquer what you don't understand. Let's start with the Crusades, the medieval version of a tourist trip. Almost. Except instead of selfies and backpacks, you carried a sword and died before you arrived. They were holy military campaigns where thousands of peasants were sent to walk all the way to Jerusalem on foot, without food, without a common language, without a decent map. The first 10 kilometres, they were already complaining. The next 500, they trudged through diarrhea, cold, plague, and ambushes. And when they arrived, if they did, they found out the Holy War was more political than spiritual, and they were cannon fodder with a cross on their backs. Many died without even seeing a Muslim. Some died for stealing bread in another Christian village, and the most hopeful died for blind faith, literally. But it wasn't just the Crusades. There were also local wars between neighbouring kingdoms over ridiculously small castles. 2 nobles fought over a rock with a river view, and 50 peasants died for it. For weeks, months, years. And when there were no wars, they invented some. That feudal lord looked at me funny. His cow crossed my land. I heard a rumour his shield copies mine. War. Most soldiers were peasants forced to fight without real armour or fair pay. They went with sticks, farming tools, and faith. The nobles had horses, elegant swords, and protection, which is why they survived and kept repeating the story. Now, if you didn't, if you died on the battlefield, you could also die for the wrong religious opinion. The Inquisition arrived as the ultimate medieval punishment reality show. Did you say something strange about God? Dreamt of a goat and mentioned it? Didn't go to mass because you had a fever? That's it. Witchcraft. The Inquisitors didn't need proof, only suspicion. And when they caught you, the solution was simple. Torture until you confessed. And if you didn't confess, more torture. And if you confessed, they burned you. It was a kind of lose-or-lose game. Methods included stretching, crushing, water down the nose, and absurd questions like, how many demons are in your soul? Wrong answer. Burned. Right answer. Also burned. The logic was perfect. If you survived the trial, you were guilty. If you died, you were innocent. Thanks for participating. If you were a woman, things were worse. Single, witch, had a garden, witch, helped a neighbour during childbirth, double witch. The punishment matched the fear your independence inspired, and yet people lived on. They kept planting, loving, raising children and praying, not because they trusted the system, but because they had no other choice. The Middle Ages were not only physically brutal but mentally exhausting, and not in a good way. When your world is full of disease, poverty, and random death, you need explanations. That's where superstition enters as the star guest. In the medieval world, everything had a cause, though rarely a scientific one. You fell down the stairs? Divine punishment? Your cow died? A neighbour's curse? Your crops dried up? Clearly a gypsy curse. Every negative event had a magical cause, and the solution was never logical, but ritualistic. A red knot on the wrist, an egg under the bed, a cross drawn with donkey saliva. The stars also spoke. If Mars aligned with Saturn, you had to hide. If a comet passed, it was a sign of death, war, or worse, taxes. The stars were Google without verifiable results. The deepest fear wasn't wolves, it was hell. That place promised if you disobeyed, lied, or were simply born poor. And believe me, you were born poor. Hell was the clergy's favourite tool to keep order. Described in such detail it was like a travel guide. Eternal fire, eternal worms, eternal screams, a buffet of suffering starting from the smallest sin. Said a curse? Hell. Ate meat on a Friday? Hell. Thought impure thoughts about the baker? Turbo hell. Guilt was a permanent state. You slept with guilt, ate with guilt, had sex with guilt, and if something went wrong, you knew God was watching you with a magnifying glass and a bad attitude. The church wasn't just a temple, it was law, government, cultural centre, the Netflix of the era. Each sermon was a new episode of psychological horror, and the priest could ruin your social life with one phrase. I think this person is reading. Reading what doesn't matter. Reading was suspicious. Ignorance wasn't a disadvantage, it was a survival guarantee. Knowledge was dangerous because questioning was heresy, and a heretic lasted as long as a burning candle. Speaking of fear, don't forget the end of the world. It was announced every time something strange happened. An eclipse, a drought, a rat with a weird face. The final judgment was coming. People left their belongings, dressed in white, prayed for days, and when nothing happened, sighed and kept suffering as usual. Prophecies were part of the daily diet, passed by word of mouth, and even if no one could read, everyone knew something was coming. Spoiler, it was never good. And in the middle of all that were those who took advantage, self-proclaimed prophets, healers, visionaries. They sold magical stones, holy water of dubious origin, relics that were clearly chicken bones. People believed because believing hurt less than accepting they were alone, dirty, and without dental care. That's how you lived, between fear of God, and fear of not having fear. And that in its way was more exhausting than tilling the land with a broken shovel. Today, if you're bored, you open TikTok, watch memes, binge a series, scroll until your thumbs bleed. In the Middle Ages, you literally sat staring at a wall, and sometimes the wall stared back because it had more social life than you. The notion of free time simply didn't exist. No weekends to rest, no vacations, no I'm going to the beach, or today I'm doing nothing. If you weren't working, you were preparing to work, fixing the consequences of work, cleaning what you worked with, or surviving others' work. In summary, leisure was a sin, literally. The church made that very clear. An idle mind was the devil's workshop, so every free minute turned into guilt, and you filled that guilt with prayers, useless chores, or voluntary self-punishment. Are you resting? No, I'm counting grains of wheat to see which one is the most blessed. Entertainment wasn't entertainment, it was forced distraction. Music? Only if you lived near someone with a lute, and that someone probably only knew 2 bad songs. So the third time you heard that ballad about a knight who lost his cow, you wished the plague would come and take them both. Games? Yes. Dice. Boards. Betting with nuts. But they weren't frequent or safe. Win too much, and you were accused of witchcraft. Lose too much, and you were killed for owing someone with more knives than patience. Theatre, only if a travelling troupe came once every 2 years to perform plays about hell, betrayal, or a parable where everyone dies in the end. Comedy, 11th century style. Books? Yes, but only if you were noble or clergy. And even then, reading was a sacred activity done in absolute silence. Reading for pleasure was on the same level as practicing black magic. Drawing, painting, embroidery. Only if you were rich and only to honour God, not for fun. The concept of a hobby was as distant as the word Netflix. You didn't embroider to relax. You embroidered because there wasn't enough thread, and you wanted to keep your hands busy so you wouldn't have rebellious ideas. And when it rained, it was worse. No light, no heating, only mud, darkness, humidity, and conversations like, "Do you think fewer people will die this year?" Ha, no. Night came, and you couldn't see anything. Candles were expensive, so you sat by the fire watching shadows dance, praying the movement wasn't a hungry rat. Sleep was the only escape, but even that was interrupted by cold, roosters, and the lice, the sound of your uncle snoring like a wounded trumpet. And if you dared to dream of another world, you'd wake up and remember that the next day awaited the same grey soup and the same hole in the floor. It's not that people lacked imagination, it's that they couldn't use it. Because thinking of another life, another reality, was dangerous. It could lead to rebellion, and rebellion led to the gallows. So yes, medieval boredom was a permanent state but disguised as virtue. Today you complain when there are no new series. In the Middle Ages, your only series was watching your roof rot over time, a new episode every time it rained. So if you wonder what people did to pass the time, the answer is nothing. Surviving was the pastime. You worked until your bones creaked. You drank beer to avoid dying from water. You survived a medical system that seemed designed by a Disney villain. And now, with your soul hanging by a thread and your body screaming in exhaustion, it's time to think. And spoiler, your social life wasn't great either. No parties, no weekends, no movie outings. There was mass once a week where you dressed in your best tunic that still smelled like cow. There, you could see people, or rather smell them before seeing them. It was the only time peasants could talk, exchange news, and if they were lucky, find a partner. Because yes, romance existed, but in very medieval forms. How do you know if someone is interested in you? They don't smile. That would be weird. Maybe they offer you a piece of bread or save you from the Lord's punishment. Or, with luck, their mother tells yours that they'll marry next week. Medieval love was quick, arranged, and left no room for Netflix-style drama. Marriage was more contract than romance. Like the person, bonus. Your dowry, your land, your livestock. That's what mattered. And if you didn't marry, your life wasn't any easier. You could end up in a convent or worse, accused of witchcraft because a single woman of 30 clearly must have a pact with the devil. Sex happened, not very hygienically, not very comfortably, and with a lot of pressure to produce children. Many children, because children were labour force but also a survival lottery. Out of 5, maybe 2 made it to adolescence. So yes, have many because you never know how many will reach 10. And if you think nobles had it better, it depends. Yes, they had castles and fancy clothes, but they were also full of intrigue, political marriages, and hanging toilets that dumped everything into a pit. You know, there was no lavender soap or bubble baths, just urine out the window and designer lice in their wigs. Now let's talk about dying, because that was truly democratic. Everyone died at any age for any reason. A fever, a cut, childbirth, a rat bite, a heresy trial, famine, a war, another war. Medieval death was creative, frequent, and not poetic at all. Funerals? Sometimes. If you were lucky, they buried you with a prayer. If not, they tossed you into a mass grave with others who weren't so lucky either. And if the plague was nearby, not even that. They burned you with the rest to avoid contagion. And yet, people kept going. They laughed, sang, told stories. Not because their lives were good, but because it was the only life they knew. Because in the middle of mud, cold, smell and pain, there were human moments. A shared meal, a joke in the square, a song at dusk. And now you, who are listening to this from the comfort of your modern bed, with your toothbrush, your hot shower, your refrigerated food, your memory foam mattress, your Wi-Fi, and your vaccines. Just think. You survived a simulation of what it would be like to live a single day in the Middle Ages. One day. Imagine a whole life. So next time the internet goes down or your coffee is lukewarm, take a breath. Remember, you could have been eating fermented porridge with your cousin while a barber pulled a tooth with a rusty hook. And if this video helped you sleep or just ruined your desire to time travel, like, subscribe, and leave in the comments which modern era you're grateful you weren't born before. Good night, and please don't dream about lice.